It's like the calm before the storm.
I'm nervous.
Hang in there.
Okay, so it's taking a second here.
Okay. Okay, I got the thumbs up. Welcome everyone to our virtual pre-recorded panel where we'll be discussing the Montana Land Reliance Anthology, A Million Acres, Montana Writers Reflect on Land and Open Space. I'm Keir Graff, the book's editor, and I'm joined today by 4 of our 20 contributors. Alexis Bonagoski is a freelance writer, photographer, and rancher who works and lives along the Yellowstone River on her ranch near Billings. Gwen Florio is the author of the award-winning Lola Wicks crime series, as well as Silent Hearts, a standalone novel set in Afghanistan, and a new crime series launching in February featuring a woman who goes on the run with her Airstream trailer. All that in addition to being the editor of the Missoulian. Sterling Holywhite Mountain recently completed his time as a Stegner Fellow and is currently at work on both a novel and an article about the relationship between Black and Indigenous justice issues that will be published in Current Affairs. And Russell Rowland is the author of 5 Montana novels, as well as 56 Counties, A Montana Journey, which is now also a radio program. I almost said rodeo program on his local NPR station. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Kira.
Thank you.
Now, on October 27th, 2016, I received an email from a woman named Gusty Clark saying Tom McGuane had given her my name and asking whether I might want to partner with Montana Land Reliance on a book of short stories commemorating MLR's millionth acre of protected open space. After I got over my giddiness that one of my literary heroes had given me an unsolicited job reference, I told her that yes, I was all in. The whole thing somehow felt so Montana, celebrating a public good by publishing a book. In addition to today's panelists, I was thrilled to receive contributions from Rick Bass, Christine Carbo, Janet Skesley-Charles, James Grady, Jamie Harrison, Ladue Hansen, Eric Heidel, Alan Morris Jones, Carrie Lesueur, Maxim Loskotov, who has a new book out, Antonia Malchik, Miley Malloy, Carolyn Patterson, Jim Robbins, and Joe Wilkins. Almost exactly 3 years later, the finished product came out on October 15th, 2019. In addition to our 20 authors and our one wonderful photographer, we were assisted by some amazing folks behind the scenes. In addition to Gusty, notably Rock Ringling and Kendall Van Dyke at the Montana Land Reliance, Chris Cobble at Riverbend Publishing, and Bruce Capdeville at Real World Design. We were too late for last year's Montana Book Festival, but in early November, various configurations of contributors fanned out across the state for events in Whitefish, Missoula, Helena, Great Falls, Bozeman, and Billings. Definitely the highlight of my year, and I'm glad we get to assemble here to do it again. So time is short, so let's get to it. I'd like to kick off by asking Alexis to tell us a little bit about Montana Land Reliance's history and mission, something she is very familiar with.
Thanks, Keir. So I will talk just a little bit about the Montana Land Reliance because this book wouldn't have been possible without the organization. And MLR was formed in 1978 to work with private landowners to conserve land across Montana. And since 1978, in fact, I think in 2019, they just hit the 1 million acre mark. So they've protected 1 million acres in the state of agricultural land from development. And where they focus are those places that are very iconic in our state, the places that if they hadn't protected that 1 million acres, more than likely they would be subdivided into little ranchettes or subdivisions and all those things that us Montanans hate to see on the landscape. And so they work really hard to protect those important ecosystems for future generations. And so they hit 1 million acres in 2019, and now they're moving very quickly on to trying to reach that 2 million acre mark in half the time. So I'm really grateful to MLR and all the work they put into protecting Montana land, and I'm very excited about this book that they put together. So, and if you want more information, just go to montanalandreliance.org.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's worth noting that this is actually the second MLR anthology, Montana Spaces being the first, which is real, it's still out there. It's out of print, but you can definitely find copies. Eric Heidel, one of our contributors, says that he buys them whenever he finds them so he can give them to people. So either hit up Eric or hit up, one of the many online sources for that. It's a really, really wonderful book.
When did that come out?
As well. So I'm trying to kind of remember how I worded my pitch to everyone. I think it evolved a little bit after, because as I started talking to people one at a time, I said, well, maybe I should say this, or maybe I should say this. I didn't actually go over those old emails, but I kind of wanted you all to sort of talk about what your first thoughts were when you accepted the assignment, how your piece evolved, and what it eventually became. And Russell, could you kick us off on that?
Sure. Thanks, Kier, first of all, for doing this project and for inviting me to be part of this panel. I actually came in kind of through the back door on this project. You invited Adrian Jowert to be part of it, and he happens to be my roommate. So he said, hey, did you get an invitation? I was like, no, I didn't. But it was worked out well that, although I feel bad that Adrian wasn't included, but anyway, it was timely for me because I've been working on a memoir for about 10 years now about my, and a lot of the focus of it is my relationship to Montana. Particularly, it's called Be a Man, so it's really focused particularly on what it means to grow up here as a male. So that was really the first thing that I thought about was, how to address that issue in a short piece for the collection. And a lot of that, my own personal experience in that arena happened to happen on my grandparents' ranch. So, a lot of what the piece ended up being about was my experience both living there and working there on the ranch. So, yeah, it was an easy transition from working on this, something that I've been thinking about a lot anyway, and just putting it together, a piece that spoke to that.
Are some of the scenes and elements of your piece for this anthology included in the memoir specifically?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Probably all of them, actually.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting, and very compelling how you spoke about, I should have underlined the line before we started, but you had a very powerful line kind of about almost how, Montana's great spaces almost like make people more silent, or like they force people into this kind of quietude or something. Can you recall the line better than I did?
Yeah, it's actually I stole it from my first novel, but yeah, it talks about how the silence becomes part of you, the quiet. It's when you're surrounded by that quiet, everything resonates more. So it just becomes more meaningful. So the silence becomes part of who you are, really.
And it's almost like is part of your journey in your memoir to sort of break that. I mean, you spoke very powerfully about, I think it was your uncle who, this early childhood trauma kind of like forced him almost to negate his own emotions for his entire life. And you saw this as a very cautionary tale.
Yeah, he was with his cousin when they went swimming in a reservoir and his cousin drowned. And my uncle was only 10, but when he was completely distraught after this incident back at the house, one of his cousins told him he needed to stop crying because he was upsetting everybody. And that when he told me that story, it just broke my heart because it was clear that my uncle had taken that to heart. He was a guy who didn't have easy access to his emotions, and it just made me, it really got to me.
Yeah, and the way you portray that is so powerful, in that he's telling you, he's sharing this anecdote as if it's some of the best advice he has ever received, and just how two people can hear the same story and take two completely different lessons from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. That's so powerful. Gwen, could you talk a little bit about your initial thoughts upon getting the call, and then how you decided to write what you did and how your piece developed?
Sure. And I wish I'd known that you were looking for that original email because I never delete anything. So somewhere in the tens of thousands of emails in my inbox, it's probably still lurking. I remember being both incredibly honored and phenomenally intimidated because the other writers, you've got some of the writers I most admire. And I just thought, no way can I write up to these standards. And yet there was no way I was going to pass up the opportunity. So
You've got a little bit of a track record yourself.
yeah, but yeah, anyway, not like that. And so I spent a while being paralyzed, but there was a deadline, so that's always the best incentive. But what I started thinking about, I had the great good fortune of growing up on a wildlife refuge. So obviously land preservation, wildland preservation is almost in my DNA. And I grew up at a time, I grew up in Delaware, when the state had just passed something called the Coastal Zone Act. So groups were buying up portions of land along the coast to protect it. There was one oil refinery already on the coast, and they wanted to prevent more of that. So again, kind of growing up with that awareness that the land I loved, again, just by being there, was precious and worth preserving. And then also the idea of space. Delaware is a teeny tiny state, but where I lived was right on marshland bordering the bay. And you hardly saw any other houses where I was. You saw this expanse of waving marsh grass. And when I moved here and saw prairie and the wind moving across it, I'm like, yeah, I know what that looks like. Except that instead of bay, there's mountains as the border. And so I started trying to knit those thoughts together. And one more thing I folded in, and this is what finally gave me the hook for it. My dad, when I was really young, he's a wildlife biologist, had to go to Saskatchewan on a project to chase geese out of farmers' fields. The farmers were killing the geese. Delaware wanted the geese to come down the flyway so that goose hunters could shoot them. So they would get killed in Delaware and not Canada, something to that effect. And he brought back all these photos, my dad's a photographer also, of these amazing, amazing, huge spaces with this giant sky. And I fell in love with those images. And then of course, when I moved to Montana, there they were in front of me. So I mushed all that together into something that I hope worked.
Oh, it absolutely does. I recall you expressed some trepidation about kind of like, well, I'm, sort of newer to Montana. Am I, a Montanan? But I think it's so important to recognize that though there are people who have deep roots in a place, as well as newer arrivals who can love it just as much. And of all the people who've moved to Montana in more recent years, I mean, you're definitely one of the ones who's, I don't know, embraced it as enthusiastically as anyone I know. And I think, it's important to not have this kind of insularity of, if you're only on the inside looking at yourself, you're not seeing it with fresh eyes. So I think that you definitely add a really important voice to the anthology. And I love that, a lot of it is not necessarily about Montana, but it's about, Saskatchewan and about Delaware. And I think that that's kind of great too, because it's not, it adds some breadth to the piece.
Thank you. It's funny coming to this place. My first year here as a journalist, I covered the Montana legislature. And I was struck by the way when legislators introduce themselves, I'm a fifth generation Montanan, they all cite their Montana credentials. And I was sort of sliding down in my seat, not having those. And again, that came to mind as I was writing this. But I just feel very lucky to have lived in two really beautiful spaces that nourish me. Yeah. And Montana is definitely one of those.
There's also an incredibly funny moment in your piece when they were trying to keep the charges dry. Can you share an anecdote?
Yeah, Dad taught us that. Again, they set off charges to scare the geese out of the field, just little explosions. But it would rain and they get wet and they wouldn't go off. And they figured out the best way to keep them dry was with condoms. So they'd go to the local drugstore in Moose Jaw and order them by the dozens. And I think one day Dad said the clerk was like, having a party? And
A really big
work.
biologist party. Yeah.
Yeah, because they are a fun bunch.
Sterling, let's talk about your piece, please. You were I'd love to hear some about your thought process in creating it, but also just your writing process, because you're one of the most exacting rewriters I've ever met, and I love it.
That's interesting. Hey, before we go, I actually went back and I looked at the email because I also have never deleted an email in my life, and so I went back and I looked, and you had said that Scott McMillian, at the Montana Quarterly had recommended me to you, and so I feel like Scott needs an acknowledgement just because I think he's doing some really great stuff with writing in the state of Montana. Let's see. What was your question? Your question is like, what is my process like? It's usually like getting angry and then like staying angry until I figure out what I'm writing about.
Do you have a technique to prod yourself to stay angry if you feel the anger is
No.
dissipating?
No, actually, no. I very specifically remember you asking me because I actually, my immediate response was like, and I may swear once or twice on this recording, so you guys either just gonna have to bleep me out or
Mostly grown-ups.
Okay, but I very specifically remember thinking like, fuck, because I was moving to California like 3 days after I got the email, and I was like, I have no idea how I'm gonna have time to do this because I was going into the move and the Stegner program, but I really wanted to write this essay because it fits something that I've been thinking about for a long time, which is like, what is this relationship between conservation and Indian land? And it's like, it's a very complicated relationship, and I've never heard anybody really talk about it. And so it had been like turning over in my mind for a long time. And so I wanted to make it work, but I just remember thinking like, I have no idea how I'm going to do this. So as far as like my process, writing essays is really different for me than writing fiction. I didn't start writing essays until a few years ago. I didn't even know I could write an essay until Scott actually asked me to write that Standing Rock piece for Montana Quarterly, and I was like, okay, fuck it, here we go. and I wrote it, and I was like, oh, I guess I can do this. And there's certain things that you can do with nonfiction that you just can't do with fiction, and vice versa. And so, and it's particularly since all my essays are like revolve around like Indian issues, and there's so little there's so little knowledge in larger America about Indian issues that it's really just wide open as far as like there's this, no matter what I'm doing, I have to do a certain amount of educating. And so I try to find, a balance between how do I educate without this just being like a chapter from a textbook, and how to, and how do I also make it enjoyable enough for myself that like I actually want to write it, because like I have to feel good about the sentences, or I'm just not gonna be able to do it. So my process for writing essays is actually really sloppy compared to fiction. Like my first drafts of fiction are a lot cleaner than my essays, and like you were saying, like you got to see me go through my drafts of that essay, and I didn't know that I was exacting, but and I don't know what that really means. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but more than anything, I just want the sentences I want the sentences to feel right, and I want them to feel right in relation to each other. And then, in the larger sense, I wanted the individual sections of that essay to feel like they at least intuitively belonged with each other. And so that was kind of my process from start to finish, whereas my fiction writing functions very differently than that.
Less anger or more anger for fiction? I mean, where does the anger fit in?
Fiction is more like I don't know, melancholy. the unending melancholy of like writing a novel that, takes years to write. I don't know. That's more like perseverance, I guess.
I think melancholy is probably a feeling that most novelists are familiar with.
Yeah.
I knew you were under a tremendous amount of pressure just because of everything else you were doing. I was so grateful that you found the time to give us the essay, because it was just, I just can't imagine this book without it. I think you do such a powerful job of as you say, educating, but also, educating, opining, and offering us just some moments of just kind of thrilling poetry, really. The end of your essay gets me every time. I just, I've read every single piece in this book, countless times, and they're all wonderful. And there are a few that kind of just, nail me every time. And certainly the way, like as Russell did, talking about silence, that particular passage was so powerful, I think.
Thanks, man. That's nice to hear. I'm glad that transferred, because that was really the only thing I wanted to do was like, can I convey this sense of how powerful the silence of the Northern Plains is? Because to me, that's the dominant aspect of the Northern Plains. It's just space and silence, and it's something that like when most people, if they've never been to the plains, Northern Plains, when they come there, it's actually shocking. I think like how quiet and how vast it is. So that makes me feel good. Thank you.
Well, thank you for giving that to us. Alexis,
Yes.
you started out as our photographer, and then you proved you were a double threat and gave us an amazing piece of writing as well. What can't you do?
A lot, actually. Yeah.
Let's talk about the essay first and then the photos.
So I was surprised to get, because I had always been involved from the beginning on the photography end. I have been taking photos for Montana Land Reliance for quite a while. So I've been to a lot of their places that they've protected. I've been all around the state for them. So I was really super excited about the photography. And then I got an email and there was an opening for I don't think I was on the original list, which is totally fine, because I actually don't see myself as a big W writer. Even though I write sometimes. And so there was an opening and I got an email saying, could you contribute an essay and can you get it to us in like 2 weeks? And I'm not a fast writer at all. That's I think why I don't write very frequently. It's like something will come over me and then I'll write it and then I'll be done for like months and then I won't really write anything. And I had this idea in my head about what I wanted to write and it wasn't working. I kept trying to make it work and pissed off about it that it wasn't working. And I was about to email Gusty and just tell her that they needed to find someone else. And then one day it just popped into my head, because really how I think of, I don't know, when I think of my life, I think very geographically. It's just sort of how my brain works. I just see Montana in the spaces that I've been, and it's sort of that concept of the land holding memories for you.
Yeah.
So when you're in a place that you've been before, you've had experiences in, it's the land that remembers for you, and you don't. So that's kind of that's how my brain works. And I started thinking about all the different really impactful and consequential experiences I've had, and started thinking about just a series of vignettes with a GPS coordinate and those experiences that I've had. And luckily it came out very quickly once I realized what I wanted to write. I'm just really honored to be in the book with so many amazing Montana writers. Sometimes it is surprising to me. Like right now, I'm surprised that I'm sitting here with all of you guys. That was how I got in the book.
The GPS coordinates is just such a brilliant touch. There's every anthology has its adventures and stories that will never be told. And we did find ourselves really close to the wire in need of a piece, and somebody said, well, Alexis is a writer. I was like, well, I kind of knew she wrote a blog or something. And read some of your pieces, like, oh my God, she is a writer. You know, how fast can she write?
Well, now we know.
And honestly, I mean, nobody. If we hadn't, you know, outed this story right now, I don't think anyone would have had any inkling how quickly that came together. I love when you're talking about how the land holds these stories and holds the memories. It kind of made me think of like Sterling. In your essay, you were talking about how it really people learn about the land through the stories they're told on the land, in the place, right? If I might be bastardizing that a little bit, but I feel like it's more or less what you're saying. And it's just interesting how I feel like there's a real truth to that. And that for those of us who have been fortunate to, you know, grow a lot in a place like Montana, I think that a lot of times there are memories that are so just intrinsically attached to that place. And I think, you know, Alexis just illustrated that so beautifully by actually pinning it down with the coordinates, so that if somebody wants to really get that picture, I mean, you painted enough of a picture with the words, but that's kind of like the web extra, I guess you could say, to your story. Well, do you want to show some of the pictures? And
Yeah, I can just go through a couple of them just so people get a sense for, you know,
Yeah.
for what some of the photos are.
Please do.
Yeah, let me know when you guys can see it.
I can see them now.
Okay. So this, I took it in the Little Snowy Mountains. And I think that all of us, something about my photography, I can't get away from the big skies. That's what captures my attention at all times, is the clouds and the skies. I tell my niece and nephew to look up, around, and they never look up at what is happening in the clouds, and every day it's something amazing. I will go on to the next one.
Yeah, that and what I love with that picture too is how it's such a giant picture and a giant sky, but then it was cropped to such amazing effect by Bruce, who saw the portion of it that would make the perfect cover.
And so this next one is Glacier, and I actually everyone often, but luckily I had some great photos of Glacier and beautiful Northwest Montana. Just the right moment at the right time with this photo. And it's not the one that went with Sterling's essay, but it was, I can't remember where it exactly is in the book, but I think it is perfect with that.
I think that went with Rick Bass's piece. Is that right?
Okay.
I think so.
And this one up at Charles Russell Wildlife Refuge, and goes with Joe Wilkins's amazing essay, 11 Kinds of Sky. Joe is a really good friend of mine, and I was really happy that this photo went with his piece. And I was going to say, one of Joe's most, the things he says that really hits me about Montana is we must love Montana enough to tell the truth about it. And I think that the essays in this book really do that. Like, it doesn't shy away from the hard things about Montana, and it doesn't paint just that sort of romantic picture of the place that we all love. It goes through all of the ups and downs.
That's a great quote from him.
Mm-hmm.
Stunning picture.
And this photo, I've been lucky enough to photograph a lot of the bison restoration work to tribal lands from Yellowstone National Park, up at Fort Peck and Fort Belknap and Wind River tribes. And I've got quite a collection of photos of these bison. So I was happy to have that included in the book.
And you briefly touch upon that in your
do one
piece.
more. Mm-hmm. And these, I'll just do this one as the last one. These are the Sweetgrass Hills in northern Montana. My family homesteaded around Conrad, Montana, and I always thought that it's a very underappreciated part of the state, the Sweetgrass Hills, and how cool they are and the history there. So I was happy to have those included in the piece, or in the book.
How long have you been a photographer, Alexis?
I still don't see myself as a I've been taking pictures since about 2015 or 14. So maybe 6 years.
I think you told me that when we met to do the first event, maybe in Whitefish or something, and I just jaw hit the floor. So I know you're having a hard time sometimes considering yourself as a writer and photographer, and yet here you are.
Yeah, here I am.
This amazing book, and to do the little sales pitch for the book to the people who are watching this panel. A portion of the proceeds from every sale does support the work of Montana Land Reliance, and so there's a little social good that you can do with your purchase as well. And of course, you, in addition to this amazing writing you get from these authors, you get these stunning photos as well. So something for the literary shelf and the coffee table, right? Well, I asked all of you to choose a short portion. I actually made assignments of each other's pieces to read a short piece and to talk about why you connected with that. And I would love to do that right now if everybody's amenable. Russell, would you kick us off by reading a portion of Gwen's?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to read from Gwen's piece, which is entitled Home. And the thing that I loved about this particular section that I'm going to read is how she captured, or I'm sorry, it's called Finding Home, is that she really captures the moment where she felt that enough of a connection to Montana after fantasizing about it for years because of her dad's talk about it and the photos and stuff. This moment is when she finally hit that moment that we all have experienced, where it was like, oh wow, this is a place where I belong. So on our final day in Glacier, my brother suggested a side trip to Browning, the main town on the Blackfeet Reservation and home to the well-regarded museum, also Sterling. We followed going to the Sun Road toward the park's east boundary, switchbacks leading us down and down from the Kodak vistas at Logan Pass. The zigzags lulled me into drowsiness. The fog swirled and parted, revealing trees like sentries hard by the road, then closed in again, enfolding us in a monochrome world. We took a final turn. The fog fled upward like a tablecloth snapped away with a flourish. The trees were gone. The horizon took a giant stride eastward. I rolled the window down. The wind rocketed past with a sound of ripping fabric, hurrying toward the vast spaces before us. The land, suddenly sunlit, stretched forever, cut by features that did nothing to interrupt its headlong rush toward that unreachable horizon. Vocabulary I'd acquired long ago resurfaced. Coulees, buttes, sloughs. I could almost picture a white cardboard rim around the view, with my father's precise hand labeling title, date, and location in the lower right-hand corner. But this was no slide. It was real, and I had to live here. It's beautiful.
So nice.
Thank you, Russell.
I want to give credit to my friend Javier Ramirez here in Chicago, who was the one who introduced me to the concept of having authors read each other's work to them, which is just, I think, such a genius idea, and I would love to see more people do it. I think it's a rare privilege to hear somebody read your words to you and to get a chance to just listen. Gwen, why don't you take the next slot there?
It's interesting. We've already talked about this passage, and fascinating that this is the one that jumped out to everyone, because it sure did to me. I left Montana in my late 20s and lived in 12 different states over the next 25 years. Part of my motivation was the need to avoid facing myself, but most of it was a sincere desire for adventure. I went to graduate school in Boston and served my country in the Navy. During my travels, I always had a strong feeling that Montana would call me back someday. It started in my work. All my books are set in Montana, and I never really considered writing about anywhere else. What I found myself exploring in my writing was how such a brutal and unforgiving place shapes the people who live in it. There's a quietness in Montana, especially in the eastern half of the state, that surrounds you and fills you up, eventually becoming part of who you are. The act of talking becomes an effort that's too much for some, especially talking about difficult things. And so much of life here is difficult. What we learn here is that everything's unpredictable. A sudden hailstorm can wipe out a year's worth of work in a few minutes. A lightning strike in the buttes can threaten your entire ranch. A summer dip can change your life forever. Not having control over the unknown is a constant source of stress, but it also makes people here adaptable. The fear of being a nuisance by talking about our feelings can motivate us to get out and do something to change our lives. It's when that fear becomes too much that it becomes a danger. I know this was true for me for a long time. It was a big part of why I drank. We learned that we can't let fear of the unknown keep us from doing our jobs or from simply living, because along with the unpredictability, this wide open land also promises that anything is possible. And sometimes we have to break through the fences around us to find those possibilities. I just love that. I love the acknowledgement of the harshness and the fact that, things can take a bad turn fast out here and you're on your own. But also, as you said so perfectly, that openness that just makes your spirit soar. It's the wonderful thing about living here. Anyway.
And I think kind of everybody who's spent time in Montana can kind of recognize somebody too in that line, that the effort of talking can be too much for some.
Yeah.
I think of some, very taciturn central Montana folks I've met in the past. Well, Russell, that actually raised a question for me, which is, have you ever tried to write something set somewhere else, fiction set somewhere else, and then abandon it? Or is it just literally never even kind of crossed your mind?
Well, when I first started writing, I was living in on the East Coast. And so I was doing a lot of sort of semi-autobiographical short stories. I was basically trying to become the next Raymond Carver, and failing badly. But yeah, it was just amazing to me when I first wrote a story about Montana. It was actually about my grandfather, or based on something that happened to him. How I just immediately felt a difference, oh, here's my voice. So yeah.
So were the Ray Carver kind of inspired pieces, were they set kind of abstractly?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, some of them were, Boston stories, but yeah, it just wasn't working until yeah.
Right on. Okay, let's Alexis, why don't you go next?
All right, I get to read from Sterling's piece, and
Yes.
I have to say that it's so relevant. Well, I mean, it was relevant when it was published, but also very relevant now. And his piece already, or inspired actually an essay so I haven't written anything since coronavirus. And I was rereading his piece, and it actually inspired me to start something new, which I know we'll talk about after this, but I just wanted to thank you for that, Sterling. So I'm going to just kind of start in the middle at the sort of a little portion that really struck me for right now. So America's struggle with race, ongoing since the country's inception, is related to this unease with origins. Notice how often we discuss racism, but do not discuss the historical origins of racism itself, the ways European ideas of race were used to build the country. I believe we avoid this kind of historicity because it troubles the American sense of self too greatly, because we cannot discuss race without discussing the half-conscious need for Americans to justify their dominion here, because we must go back to eugenics, to manifest destiny, to phrenology, to European feudalism, to the idea of royal blood, to the encomida system, the El Requerimiento, I probably didn't pronounce that right, the Reconquista, and surely further still. And because we must discuss the long and terrible history of Christian conquest, not just here, but around the globe, that religion's deep monotheistic fear of that which is not itself. These are all the ways of saying the word justify. So much intellectual and spiritual work must be done before the colonization of a people takes place, before the destruction of their food sources, before the theft of their children, before the suppression of their language and religion, before the acquisition of their land and resources, before you feel okay with all of this. Americans don't often want to talk about Indian issues because they must talk about themselves and the suppositions on which their identity is built, which necessarily means we must discuss those cultivated amber waves, those protected purple mountains, those domesticated and ever fruitful plains. Regardless of the progress made and the beauty achieved, there has been much of both. We must discuss how we got to here. To quote Faulkner, the past is never dead, it's not even past.
Yeah.
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 It's a great, the whole piece is great. And I thought that I was going back and forth with what part I was going to read. And I was like, well, I'm just going to read the whole thing. So everyone needs to buy the book to read the whole piece because it's worth it.
Yeah, it's like somebody should put that in an anthology. Oh, wait. Well, it could be re-anthologized and deserves to be, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could not be more timely, and will go on being timely. I mean, it's as Gwen was alluding to, the kind of Montana practice of saying, you know, 4th generation, 5th generation. There are people living on the land for whom that's a laughable blink of an eye, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sterling, do you care to do your reading? I was going to say rebut,
Sure.
but that's the right word.
No, I will not rebut myself. You know, I just want to say, Alexis, like there's so many beautiful lines in this piece, and I would never have guessed that you were someone that did not consider yourself a writer. And the thing that I loved about it, one of the things I really loved about it was just there's like a lack of concern for linearity. Like you just move all over the place, and that's actually, maybe it's easy for you, but that's much harder to do than maybe you think it is. And so I was, as I was going through it again last time, I was like, there was just something that I really loved about it, and I just wanted to talk like craft for a second, since we're all writers here, and I feel like that should be available to the conversation. But and I mean, the other thing that I loved about this, it was just that it's so it's always, for some reason, even though it's always shocking to me how much, even though people like people who are in the Missoula and Bozeman areas may not know it, like most of Montana is rural, and so the vast majority of the experience of the history of Montana as a state has been rural, like extremely rural, right? And so and yet very little writing comes out of rural Montana, and so I was just. I was very moved rereading this last night when I was getting ready for this, because like, God, we don't get it enough. We don't get enough rural writing. We don't get enough women writing about hunting who aren't making a big deal out of it. It's like something that she grew up doing, and so it's just part of her life. Anyway, so I want to read. I'm actually gonna maybe you guys will just mute me, but I'm gonna read one very short section, and then I'm gonna read a slightly longer section, just because I could not make a decision between the two. The one that The one that's, I mean, I don't even have page numbers on this thing. It is a cool early June evening and we are all standing in a parking lot waiting to eat. Burgers sizzle on a grill, people mill about, chatting in groups. We were all there to speak at a public hearing on the proposed Tongue River Railroad, which, if built, would haul coal from Otter Creek Valley to coal ports on the West Coast. I think about the 3 hours we all just spent in the school auditorium, the Northern Cheyenne, the ranchers, the Amish. Their words echo in my head. My name is Otto Braided Hair, very emotional. We have spiritual ties to this land. One of the things that I was told is that every creek, every drainage has some of our blood in it. If they weren't buried there, they were killed there. In this whole area, this whole region. That's why it means so much to us. And then we're going on to, this is a series of quotes. My name is Clint McRae. My family and I ranch on Rosebud Creek and the ranch borders on the Tongue River. You claim that one residence will be displaced. I'm assuming it will be one of the Amish houses that the railroad is supposed to go through. Has anyone actually gone and talked to the Amish and visited them? The answer is no. My name is Brad Sauer. I ranch down the creek from here. I want to say my neighbors, the Northern Cheyennes, thank you for showing me what free speech looks and sounds like. I sit down on the curb. I watch people laugh. I watch them eat and drink together. I watch them pat each other on the back. And I know at that moment we have won. The Tongue River Railroad and Otter Creek coal mine will not be built under their watch. In this place, I learn about community. I love that section because it's like, I don't know, that's, you know, Native communities and Native people and non-Indians in this state. To me, that's the story of this state at this moment in time, even though people in Missoula and Bozeman might think otherwise. And the other one is just this really short. I just thought it was so beautiful because like when I read this, I felt the weather instantly. And I was like, I know that weather. I know exactly how it feels. Standing in a blizzard in the middle of the prairie is a remarkable thing. It is cold. It hurts to breathe. The wind is brutal. I turn my back to it. I can barely feel my hands and feet. My quilted Carhartts are not enough to keep me warm. My teeth are chattering. The only light comes from truck headlights illuminating a large corral. A couple dozen people huddled together in groups around the other vehicles. It is almost midnight when we get word that the semis hauling the Yellowstone bison have just crossed the Missouri River and are on tribal lands. They will be here soon. The drums and the singing begin to welcome the bison home. In this place, I learn about restoration. I just think that passage is so beautiful, and to finish on that word, restoration, that word is going to be a very big word in Indian country. It's just going to get bigger and bigger. That's the direction we're going. So thank you for writing that, Alexis. I thought the piece was beautiful.
Thank you, Sterling.
Sterling, you want to talk a little bit more about restoration?
Well, I mean, there are other people who it's been used a little bit. It's actually, I was surprised to see it in Alexis's essay because I don't know how widespread it is in terms of, you know, when we're talking about like Indian issues and land and so on and so forth. But it's the only word that I can come up with that encompasses, like, if I were going to say, like, what is the one word that we can use to describe, if we were just going to, what is the umbrella that we're going to put all Indian issues under? And I think restoration is the word for it. I think it's restoration of sovereignty. I think it's restoration of land. I think it's restoration of, you know, and I think it kind of rolls from there. It's the only word I've been able to come up with, and no one would ever believe me, but I came up with it on my own, and then I started seeing Russell especially. I know Russell doesn't believe me, but like and then here and there over the last couple of years, I've seen it used here and there in different places, and I just think that's going to be the term that becomes the I think it's going to be the umbrella term for us.
You totally stole that from me.
I probably did, Russell. I probably did. And I feel no guilt whatsoever.
Yeah, but Sterling saves all his emails, so he has documentary evidence you don't have. Well, let's talk. We just have a little bit of time left, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about, and we've talked about this book a lot, but I want to talk a little bit about other things you've written. And how you use place in your other writing, whether it's fiction, essays, blogs, social media, anything. But Gwen, maybe, I mean, and the last question will be what you're working on now or what's coming next. So maybe this question could be focused a little bit more on something you've already done and published. Gwen, could you talk about how land figures in, I mean, in one of your many works or your series, how you've employed sense of place as a writer?
I think it is central to everything I write, and in many ways, including my journalism. But for my fiction, I actually start with place. You know, I start with a place I either want to go or have been that really resonated with me. And then I think, what could have happened here that would let me set a book around it? Um, so, you know, I set one in the Wind River Range in Wyoming because I feel like it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. You know, the Northern Plains, both Dakota and the Rocky Mountain front, those places just kind of just want me emotionally. And again, in some ways the plot is just a framework for me to write about both the land and the weather, and a lot of those things drive the plot in some ways. I'm being fairly incoherent here. All of my books, with the exception of the one I'm working on now and one other one, have been set in the West. The standalone I did was set in Afghanistan, which is a landscape very similar to a Western landscape, pretty rocky and barren and mountainous. Now the one I'm working on, so I'm kind of jumping ahead, but is set on the eastern shore of Maryland, near where I grew up. And it's really kind of strange to go back to, again, the landscape that formed me and try and remember what was so particular about that. And the big difference is moisture. You know, it was humid, things are green, there's a lot of bugs, there's rain, there's water that just lies on the ground. It's astounding to me when I remember that I took rain for granted. So it's been fun kind of delving into memory for that.
Now you, speaking of Silent Hearts, you reported from Afghanistan at one point, is that right?
I did.
How long did you spend over there?
I went twice, and I want to say each time was about a total of 6 weeks divided between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
What were some of the things, other than some similarity, you know, in the land, what were some of the other things you noticed about the land that you worked into that book?
I kind of joked, you know, I'd look around and go, oh yeah, we're in Wyoming. And there's a lot of bearded men with guns. I think again, the land shapes culture in a way. Afghanistan, I was there both in the winter and in the summer. The winters are unbelievably cold. The summers are super hot. Again, it's like being on the plains. The homes are made out of mud. I mean, they're sort of the materials that are all around them. It's a real agrarian. Once you get out of the cities, I felt like I needed to not use the word biblical in my stories because A, it's a Muslim country, so let's not go there. But also, I mean, that's what would come to mind. You'd see these scenes of people threshing with donkeys, and it looked like something, you know, I would remember from Bible stuff from my childhood. Again, being incoherent, but the land is phenomenally harsh and phenomenally beautiful. And I think that played into it.
Did you see evidence of destruction from the conflict over there? That
Oh God, yeah, unbelievable. You know, the Taliban burned people's vineyards. There were, you know, you'd go down the road. First of all, the roads were dirt, but big bomb craters in them, and burnt out tanks and military vehicles by the side of the road. A lot of landmines still around. So you cross, I think my very first day in Kabul, we went to go see someone's vineyard, and the signal for landmines is 3 of something, 3 red rocks, 3 little twists of stalks of some kind. And here's a field lined with red rocks. And our guy's like, come on, I'll show you. And he leads us into this field. And I just thought, oh God. But what people have to recover from there all these years later is just astounding to me. And I wish I could just wave a wand and make it all better.
Yeah. Adds a totally different perspective to conservation issues.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, just keep things from killing people.
Right. Russell, you've spoken about how you haven't said a novel anywhere but Montana, but and we've spoken, of course, about how land influenced your essay in the book. But can you talk about something specific in a previous work and how that was informed by a sense of place, or how you wrote about it, how you used it to inform the story?
Yeah, well, 3 of my novels are loosely based on our family history in the ranch in southeastern Montana, which is very isolated and sort of the insular part of that whole experience where you're around the same people a lot. I think that had a huge impact on my whole family, and of course that passed on to me. So it's something that has always been fascinating to me. So those 3 books explore a lot of that. But I think what really came to mind was the last novel I wrote, Cold Country, is more about how difficult it is to break into a community, a small rural community in Montana. And I think that when you've lived somewhere for a long time and you have these neighbors that you know exactly how they're going to behave most of the time, and a new family comes in, the unpredictability of that is very unsettling for a lot of people. And that's one of the things that I really wanted to explore in that book. So that was a fun experience, but it was also based on something that happened in our family too, when my dad took a job on a ranch in a very tight-knit community. So yeah.
The other side too.
Right.
Excellent. Alexis, I know you don't think of yourself as a writer, but people have shared your blog posts with me and said, you've got to read this amazing writer.
Apparently, I just like to write for free on my blog.
You should start charging more for that.
Yeah. I was thinking about this as everyone was talking, what comes naturally to me is writing about, like I said before, like I think geographically my mind kind of moves throughout the geography, and that's just how I can't imagine writing something without it being set here. I'm not a fiction writer, obviously, but I have a lot of things I'm writing just about, North Dakota, Montana, my family's history here. And one of the things that I've really been working on is a piece about, how it's that generational Montana cult, I call it, like I'm a 4th generation, I'm a 5th generation, and that power associated with that generational title and identity, and yet that is not transferred to Native Americans who have been here. And so the piece is sort of an exploration of that, like, need to grasp onto that as a white person in Montana to give some sort of power to what I'm saying, or some sort of political, all these things that come along with that. And yet the people who have been here the longest don't have access to that. So that's what I've been kind of exploring, because I do work with farmers and ranchers, and basically, that's something that agricultural people have to, we have to start facing, and looking at it right on, that this is not, we can't keep ignoring the history and how we got the land based on a genocide. And so anyway, that's kind of the essay that I've been working on, just sort of a personal essay about that.
Are you going to look for a place to publish that, or are you going to give that away for free?
I feel like I need to I like to write things first. So I get because it might take me a while. It might take me a year. But yeah, hopefully.
Well, I hope some magazine editors are listening to this, because now they know a writer with a powerful essay they can contact, and it'll be a little further down the road by the time this this airs. So well, excellent. Sterling, talk a little bit about, I mean, we've talked about your essays more and nonfiction, but I would love to know how this figures into your fiction.
Just thinking about, you know, your question about like, how does land play into your work? And I'm realizing that land plays into my nonfiction work far more than it does my fiction. And so I've just been sitting here like reflecting on that and wondering why that is. I think it's because because for me, I have like a political desire to like talk about land, like politically, and then you can't, I don't know, you can't really do that in fiction unless you want to be a preacher, and I'm not really interested in being a preacher in fiction. I'll preach in my nonfiction just as much as I want, but you know, but fiction, I would rather, I'm just kind of, I guess I'm fundamentally, when it comes to fiction, I want art and more than anything. And I think one of the reasons that I don't write about land in the way I do in my nonfiction, in my fiction, is because in a lot of ways, that's what people expect Native writers to do in fiction, is they just want to talk, they just want Native writers to like, you know, man, talk about your sacred relationship to the land, man. And I'm like, I don't want to, you know, I mean, it's there, but like, that's not really like, that's just like not really what I want to do with fiction. I was thinking the other night when I was driving, I was like, man, I would really, I don't know if any of you have ever read Céline, but like Journey to the End of the Night. But I was like, man, I would love to transfer that existentialist voice, that French existentialist voice, to Indian country. Like that's what I think about when I think about fiction. So like, you know, because nobody ever, like the Indian country is so diverse, and there's so many. They're you know, like my cousin and I talk about this all the time. Like we know Indians who are atheists, there are Indians who are Christians, there are Indians who are traditionalists, there are Indians who are agnostic. I mean, you know, it just goes on and on and on. That's just one factor of life we're talking about. And so what I do with my fiction is I go at it from that direction. I just want to show the world I actually know, which is not really what I see on TV or film or in most fiction, and even some fiction written by Native people. I'm like, I don't recognize that. That feels like it was written for white people. So the novel, the novel I'm working on is about, which I might be done with the draft by the end of October. It's like the most miraculous feeling I've ever had in my life. Like when I realized that, I was like, how did this happen? Like is something terrible going to happen to me before I get to the end of October? Like that's what it feels like.
You're in place until then.
But I think, what is it about? Memory, I guess. And actually I think like, no. Well, it started out as being about blood quantum, but that was when it was a story, and now that it's a novel, that's just something that threads its way through. But really, it's about the relationship between these. I mean, you could literally say this about any novel. It's about a relationship between characters, you know. It's like there it is. I've covered every novel that was ever written. A guy, but more specifically, like a guy reflecting and looking back on like maybe with regret. Okay, I know I'm going on and on here, but it's really like I just want to psychologize Indian country. Like I just want interiority and psychology, because we're always denied interiority almost always by non-Indian writers. We don't have interiors. We're just Indians. And then even Native people don't do that. Like they're not really completely honest about like what is going on inside of you. Like what are you really thinking about? How are you really responding to this? And that's about the white gaze, and not wanting to expose yourself to in a way to white readers that is going to contradict like what they want to hear from you. And my feeling is like, fuck it, you just got to put it all out there and see what happens. So that's a long answer, and I don't know if I actually answered it, but there you go.
Great answer. Do you have a working title for it that you could share? Or I know some people.
The original was called Bloodsport, but I don't think it works anymore. And so I've just been sitting in my office going, I don't know. I just keep looking at this whiteboard going, and at the top of the whiteboard, it just says titles and there's nothing else on the board. That tells you how far I've gotten.
We'll refer to it as the novel formerly known as.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm a huge Prince fan. I love that.
I cannot wait to read that. Gwen, what do you have up next?
So as I said, it's this novel set on the Eastern Shore, and Sterling, my whiteboard says book 8.
Book 8.
I've never had one of my own titles get through, and my feeling is, you know, you guys are going to name it. I'm not even going to try. It has directly to do with race, which made me a little nervous starting, and I started last year before the events of the past few months, which sort of froze me in my tracks for a while, and then I just thought, I just got to go for it. Where I grew up, there's a pretty significant Black population, and we existed side by side with tremendous, tremendous emphasis on maintaining the status quo. And Delaware, the Eastern Shore are both very Southern. Certainly among white people, there's a, you don't talk about unpleasant things. You just don't. They don't exist. And the corrosive effect that can have on people, and by not acknowledging what's happened before your very eyes, is a real vague way of saying what the book's about. So again, I didn't write for, God, 2 or 3 months. I just sat there. And then all of a sudden it just kind of grabbed hold again, and I'm moving along. I don't think I'll be done by October. I think I've told my publisher I will, but hopefully not much longer than that. I need to get it done. So congrats to you on being so close. I'm very envious.
Gwen and Alexis, you both said that you hadn't written for a few months. Sterling and Russell, either of you have work stoppages during this challenging time?
Not at all. Yeah, it's been kind of weird how it felt fairly normal for me, because I spend so much time alone anyway. So yeah, I've actually been more productive.
Rub it in, Russell.
I'm sorry.
No, it's funny you say that, Russell, because that's exactly what happened to me. I think I've worked more consistently since I moved back to Montana at the end of March, because the end of my program basically got canceled in California. And after those first couple of weeks, I've worked, I don't know, almost every day, and it has something to do with just exactly what you just said, man. I spend so much time by myself anyway that it didn't really start to feel like a pandemic to me until about 3 weeks ago. But that's for various reasons. But I feel, yeah, I've been writing a lot. I don't know how, but I've been doing it.
Russell, do you want to wrap us up with a little discussion of what you're working on?
So I'm just about done with the memoir I mentioned earlier. I've been joking that I've been working on it for 62 years, but it's actually been about 10 since I started writing it. Yeah, so it's getting close. It's, like I said, it's focusing on what it's like to grow up in the West as a male, all the mixed messages that we get here. But it also delves into a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here. And I just want to really compliment everyone on what they had to say today and what they're working on. And I mean, this has been a fabulous panel, and I would love to do more of these with you, Keir. So thanks.
Let's do it. I think we might be doing virtual events for quite a while. So I think we'll have opportunity. And I second those remarks. This has just been a real pleasure of a panel. And boy, this book was just a career highlight for me, just to have the opportunity to work with so many authors who really brought it, were really generous with their work, really willing to collaborate, because that's very important to me as an editor. I know some anthologies, apparently I've been told, just kind of people photocopy them and assemble them, but I like to really work with the authors and such wonderful personalities throughout this book. It was really, it's not an easy job, but it was just incredibly rewarding. And I got an email just the other day from a former Montana bookseller who said that we had given Montana something really special with this book. And that was so meaningful to hear. And I just think that that extends to everybody involved with this book and putting it together. It was certainly not by any stretch just me. It was a large team effort, and I couldn't be happier with the outcome. And damn, it's beautiful, right? I mean, it's beautiful. So I still, when I got my box of these, I just, kind of heart and mouth sort of moment. Definitely the most beautiful book I've been part of. So thank you all. And I think we're going to bring Festival Director Lauren Korn on for a few final words to wrap us up. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you all. This was really wonderful. I thank you for being in conversation with each other and reading from the book. I myself have the book here. I got it as a gift from my dad. I have Jim Robbins' signature in it, so I'm not sure which event my dad was at, but he was able to get that. But it's a wonderful book. Congratulations. I want to tell those of you watching now that you can buy the book at Fact and Fiction online at factandfictionbooks.com. You can also buy Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com, and there you can donate to make sure events like this continue into the fall and other seasons with MBF Plus events. And with that, I want to say thank you again to all of you for coming, both audience and authors. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.